Okay, welcome to section 1, the first video in a series of videos that should support you through your GCSE Resistant Materials coursework project. You'll notice that we're working with the edXL exam board, and that sort of information is going to be useful when you come to looking for your revision materials, etc. in preparation for examination. At this stage though, we're looking at the coursework project specifically, and what I want to do is outline I'll give you a brief outline of the sections that you will have to complete, how much those sections are worth in terms of marks, how long they're going to take you, and where we're going to start basically. So as in this first video, this section 1 video, we're going to be looking at constructing a brief and also then looking at analysing that brief, and that's very much the starting point within your project. So let's have a look at the grid underneath here. Now this grid shows you all of the sections that you have to complete within the first part of your design folder, which is the designing section, and you'll see at the top here it says design activity. Now that first section is worth 50 marks, and then there's a second section called the making activity that's also worth 50 marks. Together both of those sections make up the 60% that is your coursework grade. So your coursework is worth more than the examination that you'll sit at the end of year 11. Let's look at the sections that you're going to have to complete, or the pages that you're going to have to complete within your design folder. And these are given for you very usefully in this table as headings. So the first thing that you're going to have to be doing is completing the section of your folder that's associated with analysing the brief. Now you can see in the next column that that's worth 3 marks out of this 50 here, or 3 marks out of the total 100 marks associated with your coursework. It's going to take about an hour, okay, and you should be able to fit it onto a page. If we look down, you can see then the next sections that you're going to have to be completing, and these will all be titles in your design folder. So there will be sections in your design folder that are specific to this. You've got some idea of then the marks for each. You'll notice, for example, the initial ideas is worth 12 marks. So that's going to be the most important or the largest section in your folder. It also comes with quite a lot of time allowance, and it's obviously going to be then taking up more than a page. It's going to be spread over in order that you get those full 12 marks. We'll have a look a little bit later at how we establish what piece of work is actually worth 12 or 3 or 6 or whatever it is, depending upon the section. So this is the designing section, and it comes all the way up to final design. Obviously once you've done the final design, you're then going to be in a position to start the actual manufacture of the product. So the making section is more associated with the making of the product that you've designed. There are, however, if we look at it, some parts that are still going to be written pieces of work in your design folder. The bit at the top here, the production plan bit, it's worth 6 marks. That will be in the form of some sort of flow chart or some cartoon describing how the product is going to be made. This bit in the middle, that's worth 24, 12 and 2, that collection of marks is actually for the thing you make, for the product you make, whether that be a lamp or a radio, depending upon the brief your teacher's set. And then finally, as you would expect, at the end of the project, you're going to evaluate that and test it. And obviously that will be a written piece as well. So if you notice at the top, that's for the making activity section, which is worth 50 marks. And that first bit I showed you, this bit, is the designing section worth 50 marks. Okay, right, let's home in on the analysing the brief bit, because that's where we want to start. So that's the beginning of your project. Now, before you could analyse the brief, obviously you need to come up with a brief. Now your teacher will have given you a theme for the project that you're going to do, and it may be lighting or it may be a radio. Now what you need to do out of that is to come up with a brief. Now edXL really like it if you work with a client to produce the product. So you're not actually making this for yourself, you're actually making it for somebody else, which makes it a much more robust design and make activity. let me show you what the first page might look like, and you can then think about that within your own context. So we're going to be submitting our pages in A3 size. Whilst I've hand drawn this, actually most people choose to word process, but often before people word process they map it out in rough and think about what they want to include. Okay, now some of you might wish to map it out in rough and then check it with your teacher before you then commit the time to word processing it. But if you're not happy with your handwriting, then I would recommend that you type it out. Setting out your page, if you are typing it, give thought to the font that you're going to be using for all of your titles, because you're going to be wanting to use that font style and that font size throughout your folder in order that it has a strong corporate feel. Okay, so this page here is going to be the first page in your design folder, and it's going to be setting the scene for the project. It starts off with a situation. You're then going to come up with your brief. You're going to be producing this time plan, but actually this time plan is just based on the table that I showed you a moment ago, and you'll see that the headings, analysis, research, specification, initial ideas, etc., all the way down to evaluation, all of those sections can be taken from this table and the making table that I showed you a moment ago. Okay, so all of these headings need to be referenced in this time plan, and I've just drawn some of it. You're then going to grid this up, and you're going to be thinking about how long each section is going to take you. And again, you don't have to think too hard, because it tells you suggested times 1 hour to 3 hours, 1 hour, etc. Okay, so if we look at the analysis section, first of all, what I've done is I've drawn across the top hours, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way across to 40 hours, which is what you have to complete this. The analysis is going to be taking you one of those hours. So if we colour in that first box, we know that that hour is gone because we're using that to complete our analysis. The next section that you're going to be completing, which I'll go through in another video, is the research section. If we look at how much time, we've got 3 hours to complete that. So what we're going to do is then colour in the next 3 boxes. We've got 3 hours, then those hours are gone, and then your specification is 1 hour. So that's going to take 1 box up. And then initial ideas, it's going to be 5 to 6 hours. So you're going to need to have this gridded out, and then you're going to be colouring in 5 to 6, and so on, till you get all the way up to 40, which is where you're going to be when you've got your evaluation. Okay, so that's the time plan. It looks more complicated than it is. I would recommend that you use something like Excel to construct that and cut and paste that into a document, because actually drawing the grid is so much simpler in something like Excel. It doesn't take very long. Okay, let's look at the situation brief bit, and also this bit over here that relates to the client. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that Excel quite like it if you work with a client specifically. So it's nice to give some idea on the front page of who the client is. And we usually put the name of the client, their age, and their interests, and a little passport style photo or whatever of the client. The situation is the story that surrounds why you need to design and make the product. The brief is going to be a very simple statement of intent. I am going to. Okay, so let's look at an example of that. It might be, for example, within your situation that you have a sister who's going to university. So it might read something like, my sister is going to university. She will need a lamp to study with, but also remind home, something along those lines. It might be my mother has asked to have a radio in the kitchen or whatever, but there needs to be some kind of story behind why the person needs this. Yeah. Now within this example, the sister going to university, the brief will then be reading something along the lines of, I am going to design and make a lamp for my sister that reflects her interest, or that has some link to home, or whatever. Now you don't actually need to be too specific within this, because you haven't actually done the designing yet, and you haven't constructed your specification, which is where you're going to be talking about very much more specific aspects of the product that you're going to make. And you do that following your research, which is in the next video, and your research will contain an interview with your client. Now at this point, your client's obviously going to be giving you a clearer idea of the things that they do and they don't want, the things that they really want to include and they're not worried about. Okay, so at this stage, you don't actually need to be too specific. Right, so this is the first page within your design folder. Contains 4 key pieces of information. You've got a situation, you've got your brief, you have your time plan, which looks more complicated than it is, but all you're going to be doing is taking these numbers from the table that I showed you a moment ago, and then obviously you have this little idea of who your client is, with a couple of little bits of information just to sort of introduce them. Okay, so that's the first page within your design folder complete. The second page that's associated with analysing the brief, which is specifically mentioned in the mark scheme, looks like a mind map. Okay, and notice again, we've got an A3 piece of paper, we've got a title, and the title here is going to be, if you're word processing it, and you can build this in things like PowerPoint or Illustrator or whatever, the font and size will want to be matching the first sheet you did. If you put a coloured border on, which is absolutely fine, then make sure that the coloured border follows in the same way from the first sheet, so all the sheets have this kind of same theme running through it. Avoid busy background photos. The exam board don't like that. If you want to decorate it at all, just keep that to a simple border. Okay, those things give you absolutely no marks. It's the content, excuse me, it's the content that's the important bit. Okay, now within your mind map example, in fact I'll show you an example from the exam board. Okay, so this is an example that they have given us of the sort of thing that you want to do, and we'll look at in slightly more detail these sections that they've chosen to put in blue, but you don't need to, you can do it however you want. But your overall sheet is going to have this kind of feel, and I'm sure you've done these sorts of mind maps in other subject areas before. Let's look at the key headings though that need to be included. In my example, you'll see that I've stripped out the other bits so that you're just looking at those sections. Okay, we've got form, materials, performance requirements, user requirements, sustainability, and function. So those are the key subheadings that you're going to include within your own mind map. Now, the mark scheme, in order to get 3 marks for this, there's a need for you. Let's look at the mark scheme. It's yet another grid. This mark scheme is really useful because it explains exactly what the exam board are looking for to award 3 marks. And you'll see that across the top here, it's kind of ramped so that, if I zoom in a little bit, you'll be able to see clearer. Okay, so we've got here then, as you would expect on this side, analysing the brief, 3 marks. You know that the second section's research already, okay, and it won't come as a surprise that the next section is specification and initial ideas and review and communication. Now that matches all of your headings from your time plan and that table that I've just shown you, Okay, across the top you've got then these 4 mark boundaries. Okay, and what we do is we look at your piece of work and then we match the statement. Okay, so if we think that what you've done is not worthy of any credit at all, because there's only about a word or 2 words on that page, then obviously you'll get 0. If we think that your analysis is superficial and it leads to unclear design needs, then you'll get 1 mark. If your analysis is limited, you'll get 2. But if it's detailed, that's how you get your 3 marks. Okay, so there are 3 marks available in this section, and obviously that's what we're all aiming to do. We're all aiming to produce an analysis that's detailed. Now, I've given you the headings that you need for this analysis, so it should be easy to fall within that top mark boundary, that 3 mark boundary. Okay, so these are the headings that you are definitely going to include. Some of you will add additional branches to this, because you might actually be thinking about cost, and you'll be thinking about safety, and you'll be thinking about time, and so on. Okay, now don't forget, your analysis section is not answering questions, it's posing questions. So your research section will be starting to answer some of those questions, but at this stage you're just thinking about what you've got to do, what you need to find out about or think about before you start the designing and the making of your product. Yeah, so let's understand what these words mean. Form is all about shape, the shape of the product, and it might be, for example, that you want to find out if your client likes traditional shapes or modern shapes or abstract shapes. It might be that they particularly like some sort of design that currently exists, so you're going to be wanting to look at that. Okay. Function is, as it suggests, all about how well that product, or the basic requirements of that product. So, for example, if it's a lamp, in the example that I gave with my sister going to university, you'd be talking about whether you want to have some sort of directional light. Okay, it wants to be bright, and so on. Now remember, the key word that we looked at within our mark scheme here was detailed. So all the things that you can add on to this, or the more things you can add on to this, the better. Right, sustainability. So I'm going to draw a box around these so we can still see our main subheadings here. Okay. Again, you might be choosing to do this word process wise. You'll want to keep these sorts of fonts and stuff the same as your title font, so that it has this nice tight kind of corporate feel to it. So what do I mean by sustainability? Actually, I don't mean whether it's going to last a long time, although that is important. What I mean is, when we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about resources. Okay, so for example, plastic is made from oil, which is not sustainable. So we know that there's a limited amount of oil on the earth, and at some point we're going to run out, aren't we? So sustainability is all about whether we can regrow or renew these resources. So if we're thinking about wood, if it's from a managed forest, then that is sustainable. And you're also going to be wanting to think about, at the end of its life, whether the product is recyclable. Okay, so you can come off this branch here with lots of thoughts about how you could use materials that are from managed forests, that are renewable, that have been recycled already. So maybe you're going to be using a piece of material that was something else, and that you're going to be using that as a starting point to create your product. Okay, particularly with things like wood, we do a lot of reclaiming of those sorts of pieces, and then you can add that into your project work, and obviously that's made that whole product slightly more sustainable. Okay, right. User requirements. Now, this might relate to specific sizes of the product that you're making. So it might be, talk about the example of desk again, that it has to be a certain base size and height, and we need to think about and find out about these things. So within our research, within our interview, we're going to be asking our client, is there a maximum size? Is there a maximum height? Have you thought about where it's going to go? Yeah? Does it need to fit in with some sort of decorative style